What's up, everybody? This is Josh Lyles, founder over at Sales-CRM, host of the Freight Sales Content Pod. Today, I'm joined with Jackson Gardner. I got connected with Jackson a while back through a company that he worked for named Rebus out of Atlanta, Georgia. And Rebus uses Sales Dash. Jackson is now on his own doing some consulting. And so I'm excited to chop it up with Jackson today, talk a little bit about logistics sales and some of the stuff he's doing in the consulting space. Jackson, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, likewise. I'm excited to have this conversation here about what you have going on. So yeah, I mean, I guess just to jump right into it, let's talk about your background. Cause I mean, I took a look at it and obviously I've known you for a little while now. We just haven't had a chance to have a deep conversation like we'll be able to have today. But, I know you've been through a multitude of different positions just throughout, being in logistics and whatnot, but would love to learn more about, your logistics specific background.
Yeah. So I fell backwards into it like 99% of people, right? Started off in warehousing on that side for a local family-owned company at the time in Jacksonville, Florida called Main Ocean. They expanded up through Savannah, Charleston. They've actually got 4 or 5 more warehouses now. They're continuing to grow. Decided that warehousing was not the best fit for me. After a year and a half, went into the brokerage side, started off with a fairly small brokerage there doing carrier sales, and then went into account management and then sales at Suntech before the Mode merger. Then after the Suntech Mode merger, I got moved up to Atlanta to work with the last company I was at. There I helped run up and basically help with a lot of their founding sales because they were a startup, and was running as their director of sales. Then I went into a strategic accounts type role, and then finished up there before I started the consulting piece as director of operations. So had my hands in a little bit of everything.
That's awesome. What, I guess just between carrier sales and shipper sales, do you have a preference between one or the other just from your time being in the space?
Shipper sales for sure. The
Why is
reason
that?
being is carrier sales is a lot more cutthroat, right? If you look at, anybody who runs a brokerage, if you look at your best carrier sales rep, they're all just, for lack of better description, they're all a little crazy, right? But you have to be, because you're dealing with a very eclectic group of people, and you're dealing with a group of carriers that has changed drastically over the last 10 to 12 months, right? Mm-hmm. That being said, carrier sales is also equally important. Everybody likes to say, oh, well, you need one side more than you need the other. And that's just not true, right? For every good shipper salesperson that you have, you need at least 1 or 2 good carrier sales reps to be able to help move that freight and help people follow through on their promises.
Yeah. I feel like on the carrier sales side, you see a lot of people, or at least I see a lot of people talk online how a lot of people forget the sales aspect of carrier sales, right? Because I think that a lot of people can treat it very transactionally and stuff. I mean, I guess just from your experience, you started off in it and obviously had to work with a lot of carrier sales reps. Where do you think that people lack the sales aspect of carrier sales?
Reusing carriers, number one. Right? If you look at every major brokerage across the country, there's a few exceptions to the rule and a few carrier reps to the rule, but the majority of people don't focus on trying to reuse carriers, right? And when I say that, I'm not saying they're only using the same 10 to 15 carriers and that's it. Like, these are guys that know how to purposefully reload the carriers in a way that makes sense, not only for them, but for everyone else.
Right.
That piece is super important. It also gives you a little bit better cost control, because then it creates an established rhythm where they can book an extra load or 4 or 5, depending on how many carriers are working with regularly. So they get more efficient. They get more money as a carrier sales rep. Their commission goes up, and you can increase the amount of volume flowing through each rep.
Yeah, it makes sense. Do you find it's just more of an effort piece, or do you think it's lack of knowledge and strategy? I mean, why do you think that a lot of reps on the carrier side can fall short of that?
It all starts with training, right? If you think about it, Coyote had a great training model. Suntech had a decent training model. I know RXO has used to have a fairly decent training model. At least I don't know now. I haven't talked to a lot of those guys in a long time. Mm-hmm. But when you throw people in feet first into the fire, there's a very specific type of person that's going to be able to survive in that, and everybody else is going to burn out and then exit the industry.
Yeah, I can see. I mean, I don't know. I think with any logistics sales role, there's always turnover, and a lot of that's based on situation and stuff. But I feel like from a lot of these recordings, training is one of those things that consistently pops up. What was it like for you getting into a founding sales role in the logistics space? I mean, what was that like?
So we started off, I went from being an agent model with Suntech and having 20 plus years of an MC number, good payables history, stuff you never had to worry about, right? In that founding piece, the company I joined was less than a year old. And so you end up having to figure out and fight through with not having a long history of credit with the carriers, fighting with the factoring companies, doing all of those pieces. So you can make all the promises that you want and all of the things that you say you're going to do. But without that half of the equation, it's twice as hard. You end up doing the work 3 to 4 times over for every single level.
Talk to us a little bit about what you're doing now, consulting wise. Like, what has you excited about it? What are you excited to teach, train people on, coach people on? I'd love to hear a little bit more about your newer transition.
Yeah. So one of the advantages I had is moving back and forth between sales and operations throughout my entire career is, it becomes the chicken or the egg question. And I have become a very firm believer that you can't have one without the other, right? They're equal weights. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I like to look at when I'm talking with companies and helping people is, okay, well, if you guys are struggling with sales, let's start with your operational side, right? Well, and then let me look at what that looks like. Why is your sales team struggling in conjunction with that? Not just why are they not selling? Because I can go talk to them and hear one half of the story, right? And we all know, as a former salesperson, a salesperson's favorite habit is to complain when things aren't going their way, right? You get any salesperson in a slump, the first thing they want to do is just say, oh, woe is me, mm-hmm. right? So my first goal is always to dissect and really dive in and dig down to figure out what the best solution is and figure out what the actual root problems are. Because once you know the root problems, everything else is easy.
What are some of those common things, though, I guess, do you think it's a communication gap between sales and ops? Do you think it's more the salesperson maybe not having ops experience? Is it more them not really actually understanding what they're truly selling? I mean, what do you sort of see as the mix there and the disconnect?
So 20% of the time, it's them not understanding what they sell, right? If you walk into a room of 100 salespeople that are in logistics sales and you ask them, what exactly is it you're selling? Guarantee you 5 or 6 of them are going to know the real answer. What you're selling is a service and you're selling your reputation, right? I said, I'm going to do this for you. Here is my follow through. Here is my track record, right? In that sense, what they're selling is they're selling their service, and then they want to use that service to leverage themselves like an annuity. It's repeat business over and over and over again, right? The other 90% of it is communication. The sales rep is going to promise the world, and then the ops rep has to come in and say, oh, well, we can't actually give you the world. We can only give you this small building. And that comes from a lack of training, a lack of experience, right? A lot of people like to just throw people in as sales reps and see what sticks. They, compared to the early 2000s, from 2000 to 2010, and then the early 2010s, where you're going to come in and you're going to start as a carrier sales rep. You're going to learn how to talk to carriers, what they understand, what they like, what they don't like. Then you're going to learn how to talk to customers with a safety net of that sales rep underneath you. Then you're going to go sell, right? Most people haven't done that path in the last 10 years. Most people jump in straight into carrier sales or straight into sales or straight into account management and learn that one specific piece. And it makes it so they can't be well-rounded. And it makes it so a lot of them end up letting down their customers, right? And then you get people who started from that time and have been in 10 plus years. When that person who's only ever done sales loses a customer, they usually lose it to that person who is extremely well-rounded and who has had that cradle to grave experience.
Yeah, it makes it, it definitely would make it a challenge if you've only been on one side of it and don't understand the other sides, because they all work together and, it's all one well-oiled machine. What from, I guess, your earlier days being in brokerage and whatnot and to where selling is now, how different would you say selling back then was to how it is now in 2026?
Oh, it is drastically different. If you look at sales from a historical standpoint, my favorite thing to point out is the COVID pandemic, right? At that marker, everything changed. You always had, between whether it was a big or a small company, there was always going to be sales calls where every shipper gets 5 to 10 calls a day. After COVID happened, everybody realized that logistics is a money pit because everybody just saw it shooting to the moon, right? Like everybody saw sales and growth and everything in COVID. So everybody doubled down coming out of it, hiring a crazy number of people, seeing who sticks. When that happened, shippers went from getting 5, 10, maybe 20 calls a day, maybe even the big box guys, if you think of like P&G, Nestle, right? All the, the Fortune 50 shippers, right? They were still getting 50 calls a day. Now they're getting 200 to 300 on that big side and 50 calls a day for the small mom and pop shops. So standing out now is so much more difficult. Shippers are also shopping more when they're looking for logistics providers. They're becoming more aware, right? You've got all these other products, data is also making itself more available to shippers as well, which for most of the brokers out there that use load boards, that means that your customers are using one of your products, right? They're not being able to pull capacity off of the load boards. On top of that, you've then got, a huge group of companies that are getting bought up, bankruptcies. People aren't trusting anybody anymore because you get 2 or 3 bad actors and that ruins it for everybody else. And the volume and the scale of which that has happened from dealing with a bad actor in 2018 was very different than dealing with the repercussions of a bad actor in 2025 and now 2026.
Yeah, lots more technology that goes into it. But I mean, this may or may not be correct, but I mean, at least just from a lot of the conversations I've had with friends in the industry, vendors and all that kind of stuff, it just seems that I think more back then you had to have a little bit more knowledge on carrier vetting from your own skill. And then now these days, a lot of people just rely on the technology and then they lose those skills of vetting or knowing, when flags go off and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting it definitely feels like fraud and all that stuff has become buzzwords because you just can't avoid it. And there's just more and more of it and all that stuff. But it seems like a lot of the skills have trickled down because of how much reliance on technology that there's been.
Yeah. I mean, that's 100% correct. As people become too reliant on different tools, right? Like there's all these different tools out there, Vuma, Highway, everything else, right? They're very good tools for what they do. Highway, Carrier, sure, all those guys, that's a huge step up from just having RMIS, right? And it's a necessary need compared to where the industry now compared to where it was 10 years ago. But at the same time, people have become so reliant on those tools, they're not able to use critical thinking skills around those tools, especially with all the different changes that have happened. I mean, shoot, if you just look in the last, let's say 6 months, right? All the non-domicile stuff that has happened, removing those drivers, all of the drivers getting detained by ICE, everything else, right? That's all extremely important pieces to know. But you also need to be smart enough to know that, okay, well, if I've got a carrier that's got 400 trucks and they get flagged and you can tell these guys might have a non-domicile, well, instead of just blocking the entire carrier, just make sure the carrier is a U.S. citizen. Right? Like people aren't using that common level of common sense.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it continues to develop. But I mean, it feels like it's just this nonstop, almost network effect situation right now. And I don't know, it almost feels like it's getting worse before it's getting better. So, and there's just more solutions that have to be piled on to what's already existent.
Yeah. And that comes down to, once again, it just comes down to training and teaching people and, your senior reps sharing their knowledge. Forcing that hand.
Yeah. So talk about the training piece. I mean, I've talked about, with a couple others on episodes about this and, how it definitely seems like, for example, you take TQL and how it seems like it's a big part of their success because a lot of people that have come from their training program have a lot of, positive things to say about it among all the other things that they have to say about TQL, but that's one of the positives. I guess I'd be curious for you, just from like your experience training reps in the past and whatnot, and feeling like, hey, these are the areas that a lot of people lack when it comes to training. What are some of the key core areas that you choose to focus on with logistics sales reps when it comes to training?
Yeah. So the first thing that I do is I look at I've encouraged people to find something that interests you. Right. Part of the reason that I've had success in my career is I've stuck in very select niches, right? On the brokerage side of the world, I have always done flatbed freight, drayage, right? Things that nobody wants to touch. And I always tell people, I'm like, if you're going to go chase van freight, you're going to go compete with C.H. Robinson, who's been doing this for 30 plus years. And you're going to compete with TQL. You're going to compete with RXL, right? And if you're at a $50 million brokerage, running on thin margins against the biggest players in the game is not the right call. Right. And so for me, the training starts with teaching people, okay, here are the different modes. Here, this freight is really common and has a lot of volume, but that volume comes with a major sacrifice. It's a lot of repetitions. It's a lot of the same data entry work. And if you have the right tools in place, you can do it, but you're going to be competing against guys who can run on much skinnier margin than you can to push you back out once you get it. Right. So I always encourage people to go after the stuff that nobody wants. Right. Reefer hazmat, flatbed freight, overdimensional, drayage, LTL, whatever it is that you think you can figure out how to understand quickly. And then I sit down and walk them through what those pieces are, right? Whether it's van hazmat, reefer hazmat, walking them through and saying, okay, well, don't, let's look at your insurance policy. Maybe you don't call on Remington or go try and move gunpowder or any of that because you don't want to move class 1 on this insurance policy. And it's also extremely risky to do because it's explosives, right? Maybe you want to move something that's flammable, or maybe you want to move liquids and deal with tankers and that kind of stuff, or go learn the metals industry. It's $1 billion industry that uses trucking all across the world, right? And going and learning about how steel moves and the different kinds of metal out there and what's worth your time and what's not. Those are the types of conversations I like to have with people. Drayage is another great example there as well, where there's just so many little things you can learn, especially if you can get into refrigerated drayage, where you've got to run all of that stuff and you've got cold chain and everything else. That's its own separate world from everything else, right? And so finding those niches, finding something that interests you in those types of categories will get you much further in your career. If you double down and just go a mile deep and an inch wide, than saying, well, I'm going to go touch whatever customer will call me back, because then you lose the ability to be what everybody's calling now is consultative selling, right? I want to be just as much of an expert on their product as they are before I ever call them.
Yeah. And it's tough. I mean, there's always a lot of content and conversation around just your niche and where you get started. And I know some people struggle from, I think you said, hey, one of the best things to do is just find out what you'd be interested in. But I do think a lot of people choose to try to start with the big shippers that do move a lot of the typical dry van freight, and they don't look at some of those niches, like, I mean, even refrigerated, containers and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's pretty, that's going to be pretty, a little bit more niche stuff. The brokerage that I come from was more in the open deck space. So hot shots, flatbed, step decks, RGNs, that kind of stuff, heavy haul, over dimensional. And yeah, you're right. From a margin perspective, was a lot different than any of the dry van freight that we would move, and requires a higher level of service, requires, more information, knowledge, insurance, and all that kind of stuff. But I think, yeah, when you're a smaller brokerage, probably makes sense. Or, even if you're just an agent or somebody that's getting started off in the space, I think it's a good area to focus. Is there anything, whether it's on the training side or just with sales reps in general, from a tactic standpoint? I always like to talk to people about channels, because you see, I mean, there's always people saying, hey, cold calling's dead, cold emailing's dead, all this kind of stuff is dead from a sales channel aspect. But what is your opinion and take, especially more in the freight space, when it comes to the different sales channels of how you can acquire shippers?
None of the sales channels are dead. What has died is bad habits, right? Getting away with bad habits is what is dead, right? If you send 20 follow-ups emails that just say, just checking in on my earlier email, well, now they've got to scroll for a minute and a half to go read what your original email was. So they're just going to start deleting it, and then you're going to get marked as spam. Really, what works is value add, is understanding exactly what it is they're doing, finding out what tools out there can help you get that information, right? Whether it's, Zoom Info, Apollo, whatever your drink of choice is on finding out that information, whatever your CRM has in there, right? Figuring out their lane history, like if they have multiple shipping locations, et cetera, right? Figuring out, okay, well, if they make X product, well, that X product goes where? And then you start talking to them about those problems and those issues that come up. And then you create value add on that front. If you don't do that, what's then going to happen is you just start to get ignored. And that's what creates that attrition, right? Not training people that don't have those good habits built in is a lot easier than training a person with a good habit who's just in a slump, right? Because those slumps, the only way out is to push through, right? The other half of this is people also tend to hire the wrong type of salespeople as well.
What do you mean by that?
The best salespeople I've ever seen come from two places: college athletics and the service industry, right? I'm talking, you take a waiter who's super green or a waitress who's super green, you throw them on the carrier sales floor and say, you're going to learn here. Once you've learned everything you need to know here, we're going to move you to the next step and the next step. And with the athletes, right? I'm not talking just, team sports either on that. I'm talking individual sports, guys who, when they go out there, baseball players, wrestlers, right? Or even people who do recreational sports now after, right? Jiu-jitsu, judo, a lot of those martial arts that require high discipline, or any kind of sport where it's you versus everyone else. Those make the best salespeople, because it's now a competition between them and everyone else. And the good ones don't want to sit in the middle of the pack. They're going to be at the top of the leaderboard as fast as they can every single month. And they're going to stay there. And they're not going to let anybody catch them either.
Yeah. I mean, coming from an athletics background, it's always going to be about running up on the leaderboard, trying to run up the scoreboard. So That makes sense. And yeah, it definitely resonates on the service industry. I mean, just super hard workers. And that was also something at my last brokerage that we found a lot of success with was, those specific individuals because of their work ethic and just willingness to learn. What are some other common things that are coming up for you just in the sales space, just in regards to certain topics? What are things that have surprised you? What are some things that are common talking points of conversation right now?
Um, well, it started in August of last year. I spoke at Steel Market Update, which is a conference here in Atlanta, and everybody's been super big on AI.
Of course.
Now, I want to caveat everything I'm about to say with I like AI and it has its place in certain very specific aspects. And that the way I describe AI is it's more so just automations. That is where it has its value, is automating more. That said, these companies that are going through and only using AI for everything from carrier sales to customer calls to everything else, they're losing out on 80% of the shippers, right? That irritates everybody. You're losing out on carriers. You're losing out on that human touch that everybody values. Because I don't know about you, but let's think about it in your personal life. If you call Xfinity or AT&T and you get that stupid voice bot that comes up and says, how can I help you? 90% of people, their first words is operator, right? Get away from that chat bot as fast as possible. If you're doing that on the sales side as a sales leader, you're doing all of your salespeople a disservice, because then what happens is all of your salespeople, their customers start calling their cell phone, right? Then you lose the ability to track and see what's happening, because once they start calling that cell phone, then your ability to track is based off of them being perfect humans and logging everything. Whereas if they're calling the office lines and you have good recording software or whatever else, you can use those to teach and help and train not only them, but to help and use them as using that recording as examples for others.
So I'm curious on your point of view on this, because I feel that I've seen more of the AI usage on the carrier side than I have on the, let's just say, shipper sales or prospecting side, customer management side. I feel that I've definitely seen more usage of that on the carrier side. Where do you think that it falls short in comparison to what the human carrier sales rep does?
So I think it falls short because in that humanistic aspect, right? That's where it falls short. Drivers don't want to talk to a robot. Their job is already hard enough, right? I come from an open deck background. I'm sorry, but your average open deck or flatbed driver, anybody who hauls any material that goes there, their average age is between 55 and 62, right? I don't know about you, but like when I think about that, that's the same age as my parents, and they don't talk to robots. They just don't, right? So you're losing access to capacity that is perfectly good, because as a broker, your job is not to just go get a customer. It's to go find not just the big trucking companies that have 20, 30 plus trucks, but to also bring in a fold of 40 to 50 owner operators that also will haul for you. You're creating a capacity network that customers can't access by themselves. So if you have that piece in there, especially on the carrier side, you're losing access to that capacity overnight.
Where do you see AI being a fit right now, sales wise, anywhere in logistics? What's been a positive impact for you?
Data entry, load building, those levels of automations. Right. So if you have a customer, let's say you have there, and there's a lot of them out there, everybody on that's listening to this in a leadership position knows there's at least 3 or 4 customers in their company that probably will send 15 to 20 loads a day via email, right? Being able to scrape through those emails and have them built through automation, that is where your value is, because now the person that's building that isn't just doing data entry there, they can be used elsewhere. And so the purpose is to give people more time back to do things that will make money, not spend money.
Makes sense. Going back to a couple things on the sales side, is there anything in specific for you that you plan? Like, do you see yourself working with teams, I guess, more at the sales rep level? Do you see there needing to be a lot of coaching at the management level? Now, I was curious about this because as I've gone more on the sales dash journey and with the amount of teams that we work with, I feel like there's a lot of gaps from a sales management perspective at times where a lot of people don't fully understand sales process, sales strategy, sales cycle. Honestly, I would say just even like keeping their, like basically just no pulse in regards to what's actually happening from a sales standpoint. Because I can get it. The focus is always going to be on ops and making sure everything's running smoothly and, there's no churn and all that kind of stuff with customers and stuff. But curious about your perspective from a logistics sales management perspective for managers overseeing sales reps.
Yeah, my first rule for anybody that I talk to is if you're a sales manager and you're not selling yourself, there's a problem, right?
Why do you say
The
that?
rule that everybody expects, right? Well, I'll answer that first, is if you're not selling, you don't know what's actually happening in the market. You don't understand what it is everybody's going through on a one-to-one basis, right? So that's my first request of anybody that's in a sales management position. Go spend a day making sales calls with everybody. Block your calendar off, go call and feel how hard it is to get people on the phone. Who knows,
Right.
you might get lucky. And then your sales team is going to see, oh, it's not that hard right? You've got your cocky sales guys that are going to sit there and talk and be like, well, if the sales manager can do it and they don't call it, then they only call once a month with us, that means I should be able to do it any time of the day, right? It's a confidence boost, right? And it's also, if you've got the right type of salespeople, it drives them to outperform you as that sales manager, because everybody wants to be low man, everybody says high man on the totem pole, but you want to be that top dog, right? So that is a great thing to do. Another thing I see a lot of companies, especially in this $50 to $150 million range, they bring in sales managers that have never sold, right? That is the biggest mistake. If you're a brokerage and you bring in a guy who used to sell cell phones and that's all he knows is just, selling iPhones to people at the AT&T store, and that's your sales manager now, he doesn't know what they're going through. He doesn't understand. Right? He doesn't understand the stakes. He doesn't understand the reputation because he's been able to hide behind a bunch of things. Right? He's been able to hide behind a logo. At the end of the day, your sales team, they are the most important people because they're the ones bringing in the revenue. Everybody else is helping manage that revenue. And then once you have big enough accounts to have account managers, the account managers are maintaining your revenue as it comes in. That is the pattern. And that should be the true growth strategy there, is making sure all of those people are doing the job. There's too many people that haven't done it and they're in leadership positions or haven't done it in such a long time that they've forgotten how to.
Yeah, I think a lot of that resonates. Just from a tech perspective, I know you talked a little bit lead generation wise with Apollo and Zoom Info. I'm going to ask just from a CRM perspective. I'm just curious. I mean, obviously you've been in the game for quite some time and everything. Where do you see CRM mismanagement coming into play for sales reps in the freight industry?
It comes from lack of connectivity, right? Is number one, is you give people too much wiggle room, right? Salespeople to be as autonomous as possible within reason, right? If you give somebody so much wiggle room that they have 300 leads in their name, they're only ever going to call 100 of those and then they're going to wipe all of them out. So you've just wasted 200 leads and now get moved into a disqualified status in a quarter, right? If that's how often you're refreshing leads for your carrier or your shipper sales team. So people don't manage the number of leads that they allow people to have, right? I am a firm believer that if you're going to sell correctly and you're going to sell consultatively where you know everything about everybody you're talking to, the max I've ever seen anybody be able to handle on a consistent basis is between 80 and 100. And that's on the high end of pure Chicago style sales reps, right? Most people can only handle 40 to 50. And that's okay.
When you say this, though, I guess just for more context, like what size shippers would these typically be?
So the way I do it is I want to look at it and I look at two factors. One, multiple locations, yes or no. If no, they need to have a minimum researchable size of $250 million in top line revenue, right? Because what you can do, especially on the open deck side where I'm from, is if you can figure out what one unit of sale is, you can figure out, okay, well, if one unit weighs 30 pounds, that you can backtrack your way to figure out about how many trucks they're moving.
Gotcha.
Right. Or if they have multiple locations and it's less than that, that means especially if they're privately owned, you're not getting a real view of how much business they're actually doing. Right. Think about how many, everybody knows the big fish out there. If you think open deck, you've got Ryerson, Heitman, all those big guys, right? Well, you can see Ryerson stuff because they're publicly traded. Right. But then you've got other privately owned companies that are just as large as Ryerson that don't report any of it, like where you can't find it publicly without doing a credit check. And so, if you've got a company that says they only do 400 million, but they've got 19 locations, probably bigger than 400 million.
Right. Yeah. The locations piece is pretty interesting. I want to re-tee something up though that you said, because this comes up from some people when we talk about maximum account limits in the system. And let's just even go with your range of like 40 to 80 accounts, right? A lot of them would sit there and say, well, I can call, and I'm teeing this up because like I hear this, but I'm curious of how your answer would be of, okay, well, I can have a sales rep reach out to 80 accounts in a day, or that may take somebody a day and a half. And I know you started to go into why that's not, like that's going to be sufficient enough for them. You mentioned locations, like what are some of the other details there in terms of why you think that that might actually be the right number for them to be managing at once?
The reason I think that that's the manage is, okay, I can say, yeah, you need to make 100 calls a day, right? As a sales manager, I can go tell a sales rep, all right, you need to make 100 calls a day. What is the quality of that call going to be? It's going to be hey, I want to move your freight. Whereas if you drop that number to, say, 15, and you say, look, these need to be quality connections, and then you say, instead of making X number of calls per day, right, well, I'll just call a bunch of random numbers 80 times and nobody will say anything, and I can just ride away for 6 months until they get put on a PIP. But instead you say, I want you to make 7 quality connections a day, regardless of how many calls that takes. I want 7 connections. What's more valuable, 80 calls or 7 connections?
7 connections.
Exactly, because that's 7 at bats.
Yeah. Right.
Versus if you do blind 80 calls, doing those blind calls like that, you're looking at a connection rate of 2 to 3%. So you'll get 1 connection every 0.2 days.
Yeah, I think the quality versus quantity conversation is always one of those interesting ones. Because a lot of people play the whole timing factor and all that kind of stuff. But I do think the question does become, well, what exactly are you trying to sell, right? And I think for a lot of those that choose the quantity path, so many of them are just fishing for quotes, but not really also taking the time to understand the account and to actually understand, what are all the equipment types and modes that they ship, and are those things that you specialize in, and what are some of the common scenarios, that you run into with lookalike or similar shippers and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's just always interesting to hear what people's tactics are when it comes to that. I do think the size shipper plays a really big factor in that, in terms of like what number, because enterprise reps definitely need to have a lower number, because obviously they have so many different contacts, locations that they can be reaching out to. If somebody's more of an SMB rep going after the smaller shippers, then they're probably just going straight after decision makers and probably can, work through a higher volume there.
Oh, and this is going to get real controversial for a lot of any sales manager that listens to this, is I think that if you separate people and only have one group chugging enterprise and one group chugging SMB, you're making a mistake.
Why is that?
Because enterprise, they only do it at certain times a year, right? If you think about it, enterprise shippers are only onboarding customers or carriers between, end of February, beginning of March through beginning of June. And then again, starting in end of August, beginning of September through November up until Thanksgiving. That's where most of your enterprise customers live on onboarding.
Yeah. So you're basically just saying there's just a big dead period in between for the enterprise reps where they're only going to be active only so many months throughout the year, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And everybody wants their best sales reps to be on the enterprise side. Well, you're wasting half of your enterprise reps year by only letting them chase enterprise accounts.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot of customers out there that aren't quote unquote enterprise that are still moving 300 to 400 loads a month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what do you? So just you're bringing up a little bit about the models earlier. I guess just I'm curious for your opinion to touch on that super quick. You brought up the Chicago model, the pod model. You hear people talk about split model, cradle to grave, like all the different labels and stuff. What's your favorite model and why?
I like the pod. Right. Now the caveat on that is I believe that all pod models start cradle to grave. You start with one rep, you get them to pay for themselves. If your model is right, that's usually between $12,000 and $16,000 in GP a month, and they're paying for themselves, right?
Yep.
Then you give them a person and say, okay, you've got an extra body now to help you. Now you need to add on to that, right? Now the goal is for you to grow again, and then they get to 30, and then you give them another body and another and another and another, and they're running a pod. Well, what that pod does is it encourages consistent, scalable growth across the board, because now you have carrier sales reps that are moving into account management, account managers that are starting to see the success that the sales rep is having. And then if they're hungry, right, that account manager is going to want to start selling themselves. And I don't know about, as far as anybody in sales now, but one of the things that I get the most value out of is I was that rep that started off super hungry and pushed their way into sales. It's like, I want to do what they're doing, and then I want to beat them at their own game.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But helping other people do the same thing gives me a lot of pride too, because as I've helped somebody else turn this into a career where they can make a life-changing amount of money for themselves. Whether they stay W-2 their entire career, or they stay at the same brokerage, or they hop brokerages every 4 to 5 years, whatever it is, right? Or they go into an agency model or eventually start their own brokerage. There's enough room for everybody to eat. So as you get these more experienced sales reps that are not only selling themselves, but helping other people grow, they get to have their hands in the pot across a lot of different ways, and they can feed themselves not just with a paycheck, but they can feed themselves from an internal happiness and an internal peace that they're helping other people grow. That's what a lot of people in the logistics industry are missing as a whole, right? One of my favorite things to go back and listen to, and I encourage anybody who hasn't, is Kevin Nolan. Whenever he's talked to the Silver on the Freight Pod podcast, one of the things he said is his favorite part is training people and watching other people and helping other people now, right? We don't spend enough time as an industry doing that at all. And I think that's where you've seen a rise of people being able to jump in and help out and be consultants and do all those other pieces, is because that's what drives these people more. Everybody's got to make money, but that's where the value is needed, is because you've got a wave of guys who, the senior guys now are 33 to 40, or they're just waiting to get to the next level on somebody to retire.
Yeah, it's
and
a
those
little
are the guys that
too.
have the knowledge.
Yeah. I find it pretty ironic too, because when you interview salespeople, I interviewed a lot of people at the two brokerages that I was at, especially for a sales role. And when you talk to them about their previous situation or their current situation that they've been in, a lot of the reason why they're looking is because of growth, which obviously growth is subjective and can mean a ton of different things. But eventually a lot of it is that they would like to get into a management position. And that's where a lot of the coaching and teaching, gets into. But I also would say it's a whole different conversation, because you've got to be very good at handling stress, because then if you manage a team, then you got to manage everybody else's stress, and like their problems become your main focus on a daily basis, right? And you're basically this consistent firefighter versus like playing the offense running up the scoreboard as a sales rep, right? It's a whole different position. So I don't know. I've always found that interesting.
Yeah, and it's not just that is one thing that people don't realize, is that as a sales manager, if you're doing your job well, your entire team should be getting paid more than you do. I'm a firm believer in that.
Oh,
they're
the
ones doing the work.
Yeah.
But if you look at a lot of these models, that's not the case, right?
That's
it's very hard.
Are you saying that in the situation? Because I would say if you're just typically a manager, most of the time you're really good salespeople are always going to make more money. But are you saying that's happening in more of the situation where like you've built a book and then you get people up underneath you? Or are you saying that more of just, no, you're talking more as just like a just straight up manager?
As a straight up manager, you're on the bell curve. Your average rep should be making more than you are if you're doing your job to the best of your ability, in my opinion, right? There's a caveat.
If the reps are producing. Yeah.
Yeah. As long as every rep is producing, but then it's also on you to get the reps who aren't producing out and get ones that will produce in.
Yeah. Makes sense. I've got two more questions for you. One's still going to be sales related. One's going to be a little bit different, but follow-ups. Would love for you to talk and hear what your thoughts and opinions are just on the importance of follow-ups for logistics sales reps that are selling to shippers.
Yes. So it's crucial. If you get a customer on the line on your first call, that's a unicorn, right? Everybody needs to understand that in this industry. If you get somebody on the first call that's willing to talk to you, you just struck gold. Go buy a lottery ticket as soon as you leave that office, right? You might have used all your luck up on that call, but go buy that lottery ticket to be safe.
Yeah.
Right. What most people don't realize is your average sales cycle, it can take anywhere from 30 to 50 follow-ups in order to get a customer when it comes to a large scale customer, right? For your smaller shippers, it could be 5 to 10, maybe even 20 before you ever get a response. And that's normal, right? I know a buddy who he sat and did 97 follow-ups to get his largest customer to onboard. He went back into, and we were using Sales Dash at the time, great piece, right? Great item. And it allowed him to see it took 97 follow-ups to get this enterprise customer to onboard him.
That's insane. Yeah. And I think there's some stat out there. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's, I can't even remember if it's even 2 follow-ups or 5 follow-ups, but it's like 55% of sales reps don't make it towards either 2+ follow-ups or 5+ follow-ups. It's a pretty astounding number, right? So to get to even 20+, 10+, and, just even double digits, but 97, and it's his biggest customer. So it'd be great to even talk with him and ask him the question, do you think that 97 was worth it?
The answer is yes, because that was the first thing I asked him, right?
Yeah.
And I know what number you're talking about. And SaaS calls also are included in that. So that's, for the logistics purists out there, that's software as a service.
Yeah.
When you balance all of that in, the average stat was 20 follow-ups in order to get connection, right? 55% of people never made it past 3 follow-ups, and only 12%, I believe, was the last number that was released. That might be the second older number now from what I remember seeing, but it was 12% make it past 10, and only 2.5% make it to 20. Yeah.
What was the number on 20?
2%. Right?
Yeah.
And so when you think about it from that way, a lot of what these shippers want is they want somebody they want loyalty, right? They want somebody that's consistent and somebody that's going to prove that they're going to sit there and do whatever they need to do to sit and wait and watch and whatever it is to get their hands on that opportunity, right? So when you think about that 97 outreaches, that's crazy. But, there's other guys who have done just as many, or maybe they got to 50 before they got that opportunity. Maybe it only took them 20.
Mm-hmm.
But understanding that shippers are watching every time. They may not respond to you, but they're seeing every email that comes in.
Right.
They watch, and I know a guy who used to be at Husqvarna, and he would just watch the emails and just wait on, and he wanted to see consistency and he wanted to see change, right? Yeah. He wanted to see growth. He wanted to see value adds. And the second he stopped seeing value adds after X amount of outreaches, he stopped replying, or he just blocked them.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. It always makes me think of one of my earlier cold calls, year 1, year 2, for Sales Dash. I had called this VP of sales or account management for this one brokerage. And I got through, I think, on my 3rd attempt and got him on the phone. And he had told me, he's like, hey man, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really talk to people unless I've seen like 10 plus attempts, which I thought was really interesting. But he basically, and he still was willing to talk to me, went through a quick demo and everything. But that's always something that stuck out to me, because he's like, I'm just basically going to wait to see if you're actually willing to put in the effort to actually try to earn my business or not. So that's always been something that's kind of been stuck in the back of my mind. And obviously not that everybody looks at it that way. And there'd be a lot of people also on the opposite side that would, say, hey, kick rocks, especially even after like the 4th, 5th, or 6th attempt. But that's what I've always found so interesting and intriguing about freight brokerage is that is really just what it takes, and I think if you look at the biggest players in the space, they found a lot of success because a lot of those follow-ups get into the double digits, if not the majority of them get into the double digits to get those big wins.
Yes, they do. And they've done that. And they also recruit a bunch of experienced talent, and they make sure that experienced talent's training the new talent as well. Right.
Yeah.
So it's not just the follow up. It's that camaraderie of, look, you guys are all in the same battlefield. Here's this guy with experience. Lean on him, lean on me. And it's a group effort. Right. If you think about, part of the reason this is mostly public, this is all public now. But part of the reason Mode was interested in buying the SunTech agency program is because of the camaraderie the SunTech agencies had. I worked for an agent way back when. It was RRNF, which is the largest SunTech agent. But we had very good relationships across the board with every other agent in the system, right? I still remember to this day, there was an agent in Mississippi that we would literally go back and forth on, okay, you've got this, I've got this, and just making sure that we were working together because we all understood that there's enough room for everybody to eat, not just for 1 or 2 people to survive and everybody else sinks.
Yeah. I think people underestimate the abundance piece big time of how much it really is out there to go and get. And the last question I got for you, Jackson, a little bit more off the cuff, I guess, but I'm always kind of curious what people's thoughts are, because I'm a big believer that I think mindset is a much bigger factor when it comes specifically when it comes to sales. I think mindset is just one of the bigger factors that a lot of people don't factor in. They think of just the typical sales skills and everything, but you talk about 97 follow-ups, right? That requires a whole different kind of mindset and a specific mindset to really even just endure through that whole thing. Is that something that you found, whether it's for yourself personally with the reps that you've coached, mentored, managed, and all that kind of stuff? How often would mindset be something that you would talk about, and how important do you think it is in sales, especially in logistics?
It's vital, right? So give you a little background. I grew up in a Navy family, and my dad was part of the last of what is considered the old chiefs, right? Where they had a lot of respect. They did a lot of things. And I spent a lot of time being fortunate enough where some of the buds trainees would go through one of the bases I lived on, right? They would do SAR training there and do all of that stuff because we had the Olympic sized pool and everything else. And we had it was the largest SAR training facility in the country. There are 3 letters. I'm just going to say the letters. I don't know if you're okay with me cursing or not.
Go for it.
But it's DF.
It's a logistics podcast.
Fair. Trying to be respectful first, at least. But it's
all good.
DFQ.
Sorry, go ahead.
DFQ are the 3 most important letters to anyone in logistics. Don't fucking quit. right? If you think about it, how many people that you see that had potential have washed out of the industry because they quit, right? And if you don't have the mental fortitude to be able to sit down and tell yourself you're doing okay, you just had a bad day and shake it off, which comes back to the athletics mindset, right? Is, okay, yeah, I lost a match today. I'll just go I'll win tomorrow, right? But it's that don't fucking quit attitude that gets everybody success in this industry. And every sales leader that's made it to that sales leadership position has had that same piece. Every brokerage owner has had that same mentality, right? If you go look at, a couple of them that are really coming up fast now that are really popular on LinkedIn, right? Shout out to Seth Bland and then Black Box Logistics as well, right? Both of those guys, both of those brokerages,
Absolutely.
those two owners, they don't quit ever.
They grind.
Right?
And you're seeing the fruits of it.
Yeah. And they waited around long enough to see the fruits of it. That's the thing, is people also always forget as well, is your reward isn't going to happen tomorrow when you're making sales calls, right? Your reward as a salesperson is in 6 months when you've made a life-changing amount of money and it's now consistent money coming in, right? It's a year from now when you can go buy that new car that you've always wanted and get that physical reward for the mental labor that you've put in.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like on average, especially for a lot of sales reps, new role, anything, I think you got to really dig in for a solid 2 years. I think after a 2-year period, you could, not to say like ever coast necessarily, but get to a spot where your book's built, like you've got a healthier pipeline and all that kind of stuff. But I just think at times to learn the skills and like really get to a point where you're figuring out your niche and all that stuff. But so many people think it should happen within 3 to 6 months. And it's just, I think no matter what you're selling, it always takes more time.
Yes, it does. So and that's the last big piece of advice I think anybody can get out there is, whether you're just starting your sales or you've been doing it for 2 years and you've gotten a little lazy, right? If you want to change your life, it's 6 months down the road, but you got to start it today.
Yep. DFQ, man. I like it. That's going to be something that carries on. Well, Jackson, here's what we'll do. We'll drop your LinkedIn profile in the comments in the description in the videos we posted everywhere, YouTube, Spotify, and a few other different places and whatnot. So I'll make sure to drop that just in case anybody can find you. Any last words before we sign off here?
No, just thank you for the time. And anybody who's watching this who hasn't used Sales Dash, please give it a try. If you're using HubSpot or Salesforce, it will change your life. I promise. As a former user, it is worth it.
Heck yeah, man. We appreciate that. Jackson Gardner, we appreciate you taking the time, man. Always good to see you, and we'll catch you soon.
Yep. See you soon.
Take care.
You too.